I never thought my own father would call me one December evening just to say, Anna, don't come home for Christmas. That phone call shattered me. It's strange how a single sentence can split your life into before and after. Before that call, I still held onto the illusion that maybe, just maybe, my family could be something close to normal. After that call, I knew things would never be the same again. The night it happened, I was sitting by my apartment window in New York. The city was already glowing with holiday lights. Storefronts covered in gold, trees wrapped in silver, even the fire escapes dressed in strings of blinking reds and greens. I had just finished a long day at the office, and for the first time in weeks, I was letting myself feel a bit of holiday warmth. I poured a glass of wine, put on an old Ella Fitzgerald Christmas record, and leaned back, just breathing. That was when my phone rang. My dad's name flashed across the screen. I smiled without thinking, because no matter what, there's always that small part of you that wants a call from your parents to mean comfort, or love, or, at the very least, something neutral. I answered with a bright, "Hey, Dad." His voice didn't match my energy. It was flat, almost rehearsed. "Anna," he said, pausing like he needed courage. "I think it would be better if you didn't come home this year for Christmas." At first, I thought he was joking. I laughed awkwardly and waited for the punchline, but there was no laughter on the other end, just silence heavy enough to crush me. "What do you mean, better if I don't come home?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "Your brother, Daniel, he's bringing his new girlfriend. Your mother and I don't want things to feel uncomfortable. You've been doing so well, Anna. We don't want to overshadow him. This is an important holiday for him." I swear my chest tightened so much I couldn't breathe. My mind kept repeating his words. "We don't want to overshadow him." Like my very existence was a spotlight too bright. Like my presence was a problem to be managed. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, hoping I'd misheard. "So, you're telling me, because I've worked hard and built a life, I'm not welcome at my own family's Christmas table?" There was a long sigh. "It's not like that, sweetheart. We're just trying to keep the peace. Daniel has been sensitive lately. You know how he is. We think it's best if you join us for New Year's instead." I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, tears threatening to fall. Sensitive. That word always made me grip my teeth. Daniel was always sensitive. Sensitive when he didn't get what he wanted. Sensitive when my achievements made him feel small. Sensitive when the world didn't revolve around him, and somehow that sensitivity had always been more important to my parents than my feelings, than my milestones, than my presence. I wanted to scream. Instead, my voice came out icy. "So you're uninviting me from Christmas to protect Daniel's ego?" Dad didn't answer right away. Finally, he murmured, "It's only one Christmas, Anna. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I hung up before I could say something unforgivable. My phone slid from my hand and landed on the floor with a dull thud. I stared at the glass of wine on the table. It suddenly looked ridiculous, like a prop in a life that didn't belong to me. The music kept playing. Ella's voice, warm and rich, filled the room with lyrics about snow and love and family. The irony stung so much I wanted to rip the record off the player. Outside, people were laughing. Couples were holding hands. A group of friends walked past with Christmas shopping bags, their cheeks red from the cold. And here I was in my apartment, not just alone, but officially unwanted. I curled into the corner of my couch and tried to make sense of it. My mind spun. Had I ever been truly wanted at those gatherings? Or had I just been tolerated until now? I thought of last Christmas when I brought a bottle of expensive wine and a new book for Mom, and they barely glanced at it before showering Daniel with praise for showing up with a store-bought pie. Or the year before when I told them about a promotion I'd worked myself to exhaustion to earn, and they immediately changed the subject to Daniel's potential career moves that never seemed to stick. This wasn't new. This was just louder, clearer, crueler. I cried that night, not the soft, cinematic kind of crying, but the ugly, choking sobs that leave your eyes swollen and your throat raw. I cried for the little girl in me who had always tried to be enough, to earn a seat at that table, to hear a genuine, "We're proud of you," without a comparison attached. I cried for the woman I had become, one who could run a company but couldn't seem to win a spot in her own family's holiday traditions. By the time the tears slowed, it was past midnight. The city outside had quieted, only the hum of taxis and the faint whistle of wind down the avenue. I picked up my phone again. I thought about calling him back, demanding he take it back, insisting that I would show up anyway. But then I pictured myself walking through that front door, sitting down at that table, knowing I wasn't wanted, knowing every glance would feel like a reminder that I didn't belong. No, that would hurt worse, so I didn't call back. I didn't fight. Instead, I sat in the silence of my apartment, hugging myself against the cold truth. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally will put conditions on their love. And in that moment, my father's condition was clear. My success, my light, my very presence was too much for them to handle. I went to bed that night with a hollow chest and a pounding head, whispering to myself like a prayer, "I will not dim my light just to make them comfortable in their shadows." And though I didn't know it then, that phone call, the one that broke my heart, was also the one that would change everything. When I think back to my childhood in Queens, New York, it feels like watching a movie where I was always cast as the extra in my own family's story. The streets I grew up on were noisy, full of life. Kids riding their bikes in tight circles, old women yelling from stoops, the smell of pizza drifting out of corner shops. But inside our house, the air was different. It carried an invisible weight, one that pressed me down and lifted my brother Daniel up. From as early as I can remember, Daniel was the chosen one. He wasn't smarter, he wasn't kinder, he wasn't even particularly ambitious, but he was the son my parents adored, the golden boy. He got away with things that would have earned me lectures or punishments. If he came home late, it was because he was finding himself. But if I missed curfew by 5 minutes, I was irresponsible. But if he scraped by with a passing grade, they praised his effort. But if I brought home straight A's, they'd glance at the report card and say, "Well, that's expected from you, Anna." But I learned very quickly that excellence didn't mean applause in my house. It meant silence. Or worse, it meant being compared to Daniel in ways that cut deep. I remember one particular night, I was 12. I had just won first place in a science fair project I'd poured months into. I was so proud. I came home clutching the ribbon, my cheeks aching from smiling all day. I rushed into the kitchen where my mom was cooking dinner and held the ribbon out like a treasure. She looked at it, nodded, and said, "That's nice, honey." And then, without missing a beat, she asked if I could help Daniel with his history homework because he was struggling again. That moment stuck to me like glue. My victory shrank into nothing. And all that mattered was how to keep Daniel afloat. The worst part? I didn't even get angry back then. I internalized it. I thought, maybe this is love. Maybe love means being invisible so someone else can shine. But as I grew older, the cracks became impossible to ignore. Daniel wasn't bad, not exactly. He was charming in a way that pulled people toward him. He'd walk into a room, flash that easy grin, and suddenly everyone wanted to forgive him. Teachers, friends, girlfriends. It was like he had this spell. And my parents weren't immune. They laughed at his jokes, brushed off his failures, and treated his mediocrity like it was brilliance. Meanwhile, I had to climb mountains just to be acknowledged. I can still picture the living room where all this played out. The worn leather couch, the family photos on the wall, the faint smell of furniture polish mixed with my mom's candles. Daniel would be sprawled across the couch, half watching TV, half working on some last-minute school project. My mom would hover nearby, doting, reminding him to take breaks, asking if he needed snacks. I'd be at the dining table, books spread out, grinding through my assignments. Hours of quiet diligence. No one noticed. No one asked if I was tired or if I needed anything. It was like my efforts were background noise, part of the furniture. And the irony? Whenever Daniel messed up, and he messed up a lot, it somehow circled back to me. Anna, can't you set a better example for your brother? Anna, you should help him more. I was the safety net, the role model, the stand-in parent. I bore the responsibility without ever being offered the affection. That imbalance carved a hollow inside me. I went to bed many nights wondering what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I lovable in the effortless way Daniel was? Why did my worth always feel conditional, tied to achievements that nobody even celebrated? One winter afternoon still burns in my memory. I must have been around 15. I'd just gotten a letter saying I'd been accepted into an advanced summer program at NYU, a huge deal for a kid from our neighborhood. I walked into the kitchen, heart racing, letter clutched tight. My dad was reading the paper. Daniel was slumped at the table with a math test in front of him, a big red D scrawled across the top. I shared my news, waiting for excitement, for pride. My dad lowered the paper, gave me a half smile, then turned to Daniel and said, "Don't worry about that grade, son. You'll find your path. Not everyone's meant to be academic like Anna." And just like that, the spotlight swung back to him. My triumph vanished under the weight of their worry for him. That was my life. Victories swallowed, struggles ignored, emotions dismissed. You know, people always say siblings should be a team, lifting each other up, but favoritism poisoned that bond before it even had a chance to grow. Daniel didn't hate me, but he didn't see me either. Why would he? When the entire household revolved around his moods, his needs, his failures disguised as potential. There was no space left to recognize mine. And me? I carried the loneliness quietly. I smiled at school, I laughed with friends. But inside, I was that invisible girl in the corner of her own family's story. It shaped me in ways I'm still untangling today. It taught me resilience, yes, but it also left scars. It whispered into my ear again and again, "You are only as valuable as the weight you can carry for others. Your light only matters if it doesn't blind anyone else. Growing up in the shadows doesn't just dim you, it distorts you. It makes you doubt your own worth, makes you question whether the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally ever really saw you at all." Looking back, I see how much of my adult life was built on trying to outrun that shadow. Every award, every job, every milestone, I chased them, not only because I wanted success, but because I wanted proof. Proof that I was worthy, proof that I mattered, proof that even if my family couldn't see me, the world would. But as a child in that house, none of that existed yet. All I had was the ache of invisibility, the quiet sadness of knowing my place was always second, always lesser, always in the shadows. If my childhood had a headline, it would have been, "Daniel shines, Anna survives." That's how it always felt. My brother Daniel was the golden boy, and not just in the way parents sometimes favor a kid without meaning to. No, this was blatant, obvious, woven into every dinner conversation, every family gathering, every decision they made. It wasn't that Daniel did extraordinary things, quite the opposite. He could do the bare minimum and still be celebrated like he'd climbed Everest. I remember one Thanksgiving when he set the table, just set the table, nothing more. And my mom clasped her hands together and said, "Daniel, you're so thoughtful. You're going to make such a wonderful husband one day." Meanwhile, I had cooked half the meal with her and got nothing more than, "Anna, don't forget to clean up afterward." That's how it always was. If you came home with a C, they'd say, "At least you passed. Good job." If I came home with an A-, it was, "Why not an A+?" He'd make a silly doodle in the corner of his notebook, and my dad would brag about his creative talent. I'd win an art contest, and they'd shrug, "Of course you did. You're always like this." The constant comparisons weren't subtle either. They'd say things like, "Anna, you should be more like your brother, relaxed, easygoing," or, "Daniel just has this charm about him. You're too intense sometimes." It was as if my drive, my focus, my desire to achieve was somehow a flaw. I think the moment I truly understood how stacked the deck was happened in middle school. Daniel was in 7th grade, I was in 8th. He had forgotten to do a history project. Completely forgotten. The morning it was due, he slapped together some messy poster board with half-written notes. I watched him work, horrified, knowing how much effort my own projects took. When he got home later, he was grinning ear to ear. "Mr. Collins said I had raw talent and that I just needed more structure." That same week, I got an essay back with a 97, and my mom's response was, "Don't let it get to your head, Anna. Perfection doesn't make you likable." Do you know what that does to a kid? To pour your heart into something only to be told not to be proud, while watching your brother get praised for being careless? It makes you question everything. It makes you angry, but even worse, it makes you doubt yourself. I still remember the sound of my parents' voices when they bragged about him. My mom's high-pitched, sing-songy tone, like she was announcing the arrival of royalty. My dad's deep chuckle as he told neighbors, "Daniel's got so much potential. Just wait and see." The word potential became a shield they wrapped around him every time he failed, and a weapon they used against me. Because no matter how much I accomplished, apparently I had already reached my potential, while Daniel's was always out there, waiting to be discovered. It was maddening. Even in small, everyday moments, he was the center of the universe. He'd walk into the room and suddenly all the attention shifted. My mom's eyes lit up. My dad's posture changed. If Daniel had a story, even a pointless one about what he ate for lunch, everyone listened like it was a revelation. If I tried to share something about my day, the room would fall quiet, polite nods at best, before circling back to Daniel. And the worst part? He knew it. He leaned into it. Not maliciously all the time, but with that smug kind of ease people have when they've never had to fight for attention. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence, and no one corrected him. He'd crack a joke at my expense, and they'd all laugh. I learned to bite my tongue, to swallow my retorts, to build armor around myself because speaking up never went well. There was one night in high school that still makes my stomach twist. I had just been chosen as captain of the debate team, a big deal, something I worked for years to earn. I told my family at dinner, waiting for some sign of recognition. My dad nodded, said, "That's great." Then he turned to Daniel and asked about his weekend basketball game. Daniel had sat on the bench the entire game, hadn't scored a single point. But when he shrugged and said, "Coach thinks I've got potential," my dad practically beamed. The conversation for the rest of the night revolved around that. My captaincy vanished into thin air. I used to lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, fists clenched under the covers, replaying those moments. The praise he got for breathing, the dismissal I got for excelling, it brewed this anger inside me, a low simmer that sometimes felt like it would boil over. But mostly it just hurt. It hurt to realize that in my own family, love was conditional, uneven, unbalanced. Daniel was the golden boy. He could stumble, fall, fail, and still be caught in a net of affection. I could soar, and it would barely make a ripple. And living under that double standard didn't just make me resent him. It made me resent myself, too. Because part of me wondered, maybe they were right. Maybe no matter what I achieved, it just didn't matter. Maybe shining was dangerous. Maybe being too good meant being left out in the cold. That's the poison of favoritism. It doesn't just elevate one child, it corrodes the other. And for me, growing up alongside the golden boy wasn't just unfair. It was a daily reminder that in my parents' eyes, love could be measured, compared, and rationed. And that realization filled me not just with sadness, but with a deep, burning sense of injustice that never fully went away. By the time I turned 18, I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my brother anymore. Queens had been my cage, a place where every compliment slipped past me and landed at Daniel's feet. I needed out. I needed air. Leaving for college wasn't just about getting an education. It was survival. When I got my acceptance letter to NYU, I remember clutching it in my hands, heart racing, not because I doubted I'd get in, but because I knew it meant freedom. It meant no more side comments at the dinner table. No more, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" No more applause for mediocrity while excellence was ignored. It meant stepping into a city that didn't know me as Daniel's sister. The first weeks in New York were a blur of noise and light. I moved into a cramped dorm room with a girl from California who had posters of indie bands I'd never heard of, and a laugh that filled every corner of the space. For the first time, I felt anonymous. No one knew my history. No one cared that I'd grown up in a house where love was unevenly measured. What they cared about was who I was showing up as right now. I threw myself into my classes. Computer science was like this whole new universe that made sense in ways my family never did. Lines of code obeyed logic. If something broke, you could find the bug, fix it, and it would work. There was no favoritism, no golden boy, just me, my mind, and the machine. I'd spend hours in the computer lab, sometimes until 3 a.m, lit only by the blue glow of the monitors. Fingers flying across the keyboard, empty coffee cups piling up, headphones blasting lo-fi beats to keep me awake. Those nights didn't feel lonely. They felt alive, like I was carving a place for myself in the world, line by line, program by program. But it wasn't just the work. It was the grind outside of class, too. I knew I couldn't count on my parents for support. Not emotionally, not financially. So I took on part-time jobs. I worked as a barista on weekends, pulling espressos for impatient New Yorkers who thought their coffee was the most urgent matter in the world. I babysat in the evenings, wiping noses and reading bedtime stories until my voice cracked. I even walked dogs. Rain, snow, didn't matter. I needed the cash. And more than that, I needed the independence. There were nights I'd collapse onto my dorm bed, every muscle aching, and wonder if I could keep going. But then I'd remember Daniel sitting at home, coasting, cushioned by our parents' endless praise, and I'd get this fire in my chest, I refused to let my life be defined by being less than. And I refused to let his comfort become my ceiling. By junior year, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. I joined a group of classmates who were obsessed with startups. We'd meet in crowded coffee shops, laptops open, scribbling ideas on napkins and whiteboards. That was where I felt at home, surrounded by people who cared about ideas, not family hierarchies. People who pushed each other to think bigger, work harder, fail faster, and try again. Our first project was a disaster, an app that no one downloaded, not even our friends. But we learned. The second one got a few hundred users. The third? That was the spark. I stayed up for days fine-tuning it, skipping meals, skipping classes, coding until my eyes burned. When it finally launched and people actually used it, real people, not just our inner circle, I cried. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. My work, my sweat, my vision. I can still remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't Daniel's sister anymore. I was Anna. Just Anna. It was at a networking event in downtown Manhattan. I was nervous, clutching a stack of business cards, standing among people who seemed older, smarter, more polished. But when I introduced myself and someone said, "Oh, I've heard about your project. It's really promising," I felt this weight lift off me. For once, my name carried its own gravity. It wasn't easy. God, it was never easy. There were nights of rejection emails that made me want to curl up and quit. Investors who smiled politely and said, "Not for us." The professors who told me to be more realistic, but every time the world told me no, I told myself yes. I told myself that my path didn't have to look like anyone else's, certainly not Daniel's. Looking back, I think that was the biggest gift of all the unfairness at home. It forced me to build a backbone, to create my own worth outside of their validation. It made me relentless. While Daniel was told, "You can do anything," and believed it without effort, I was told, "Don't get ahead of yourself," and decided to prove them wrong. Finding my path wasn't a straight line. It was messy, filled with doubt and exhaustion. But it was mine. Every sleepless night in the lab, every dollar scraped together, every failed prototype, it was mine. And for the first time, I wasn't living in anyone's shadow. I was building my own light. And deep down, I think that's why leaving Queens saved me. Because if I'd stayed, I would have been trapped in their narrative forever. Out here, in the city that never sleeps, I wrote my own. Becoming a CEO wasn't something I'd dreamed of as a little girl. Honestly, when I was younger, all I ever wanted was for my parents to look at me the way they looked at Daniel, like I was enough, like I mattered. But somewhere between the late nights in the NYU computer lab and the long hours juggling 3 part-time jobs, my focus shifted. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about building something that no one could ignore. The startup that changed my life didn't look like much at first. We were a team of 4, crowded into a tiny co-working space in downtown Manhattan. The walls were peeling, the coffee machine sputtered more than it brewed, and in the winter you could see your breath indoors. But we had drive. We had this insane belief that we could take an idea and turn it into something real. The first time an investor actually said yes to us, I remember walking out of that meeting shaking. Not out of fear, but adrenaline. I was 26, sitting across from people in tailored suits who had been in the game for decades, and they were nodding, scribbling notes, asking questions that showed they believed in me, in us. That night I called my mom. I wanted to share the news. I wanted her to be proud. She picked up, distracted as always. I told her about the funding, about the investors, about how this could actually be the start of something huge. There was a pause. Then she said, "That's nice, Anna. Did you hear Daniel got invited to speak at his church group this Sunday? The whole family's going to be there." It was like being doused with cold water. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence, staring at the city lights outside my window. That was the moment it clicked. My parents were never going to see me for who I was becoming. They didn't even have the language for it. To them, Daniel's small accomplishments would always shine brighter than my biggest leaps. But here's the thing, I didn't stop. If anything, it fueled me. I worked harder. I poured myself into the company. I started leading meetings, negotiating contracts, making calls that scared me but also thrilled me. And slowly, painfully, it paid off. Our product took off. We scaled fast. Suddenly, we weren't just a scrappy startup. We were being featured in tech magazines, asked to speak at conferences, interviewed on podcasts. My face was on panels, my name in articles, and yet, my parents didn't know, or maybe they knew but didn't want to know. They thought I was just doing some computer thing in the city. I'd try to explain sometimes, but the glazed look in their eyes told me it wasn't landing. Daniel's new girlfriend, his latest job prospect, his minor achievements, those were the stories they told at family dinners. Not me. I'd sit across from them on those rare visits home, listening as they asked Daniel question after question, their voices warm with interest. Then they'd turn to me with polite smiles. "So, Anna, how's work?" That's it, 3 words. How's work, how's work? Work was me building a company valued at hundreds of millions. Work was me leading a team of 50 brilliant minds. Work was me holding my own in boardrooms full of men twice my age. But none of that mattered to them. Not really. The irony still stings. To the world, I was Anna, the young, ambitious CEO, a woman who had fought tooth and nail to rise in an industry that wasn't built for her. But to my parents, I was just Anna, the daughter, the sister, the one who'd never shine as bright as Daniel. It was a strange duality, this mix of pride and bitterness. I'd get off stage after giving a keynote speech, people lining up to shake my hand, to ask for advice, and I'd feel this surge of accomplishment. Then I'd remember that back in Queens, my mom was probably bragging about how Daniel fixed a neighbor's car for free. Don't get me wrong, I loved my success. I earned it. Every sleepless night, every rejection, every risk, it was mine. But sometimes, late at night, I wondered what it would feel like if my parents could see me, really see me. If they could just once say, "Anna, we're proud of you." But that day never came. And maybe, in a way, that's what pushed me to keep climbing. Because I realized I wasn't building this empire for their approval. I was building it for me. For the little girl who once sat at the kitchen table with straight A's and got told, "That's nice, but look how Daniel scored a goal today." They never knew the CEO I became. Not truly. To them, I was invisible in ways I had learned to live with. But to the rest of the world, I was undeniable. And standing in that space, caught between invisibility at home and recognition everywhere else, was both the sweetest victory and the saddest truth of my life. Christmas has always been complicated for me. I used to cling to it as a child, the lights, the carols, the smell of pine filling our tiny Queens apartment. I told myself maybe, just maybe, the season would soften things, make my parents look at me with warmth instead of indifference. But by the time I was an adult, Christmas had become less about joy and more about bracing myself for another round of being invisible. Still, I kept showing up. Part of me wanted the tradition, the connection, even if it hurt. But nothing prepared me for the phone call that December. The one that made it clear I wasn't just overlooked anymore. I was unwelcome. It was my mother who called this time. Her voice was light, almost casual, the way you talk about groceries or the weather. "Anna," she said, "we think it's best if you sit this Christmas out." I froze. "What do you mean, sit it out? It's Christmas. I already booked my flight." There was a pause, the faint rustle of her hand covering the receiver as if to whisper something to my dad. Then she sighed. "It's just, Daniel's bringing his new girlfriend, and we don't want things to feel awkward. She's a little sensitive, and, well, you have this way of, outshining people." Outshining. That was the word she used. Like my hard work, my presence was some kind of threat. I laughed, but it wasn't the amused kind. It was sharp, bitter, the kind of laugh you make when the truth is too painful to sit quietly with. "So you're telling me I can't come home because you're worried Daniel's girlfriend might feel overshadowed by me?" My mom's silence was answer enough. When she finally spoke, her tone was clipped, like she wanted to end the call quickly. "Anna, don't take it personally. We just want this year to be special for Daniel. He's been through so much, and he deserves a Christmas that's about him for once." For once. The words punched me in the chest. For once. Every Christmas I could remember had been about Daniel. Every birthday, every milestone, every gathering. But apparently, even now, me, their daughter who had built a life on her own, who had fought tooth and nail to be seen, I was still too much. Still a threat to his spotlight. I hung up the phone and sat there in my apartment, staring at the twinkling lights I'd strung up on my window just days before. They looked different now. Mocking, almost. My hands trembled as I tried to process what had just happened. I'd been excluded before, in 100 small ways, conversations I wasn't part of, compliments that never came, family photos where my presence felt like an afterthought. But this was new. This was official, a ban, a line drawn. I wasn't just overlooked. I was rejected. The thing about rejection from your own family is that it doesn't land like rejection anywhere else. You can rationalize a job rejection, a breakup, a friendship drifting apart. But when your own parents look at you, the person you became, the life you built, and still say, "Not this year, not you," it cuts deeper than any blade. I paced the room, the sound of my heels hitting the hardwood floor too loud in the silence. My chest was tight, my throat raw like I'd swallowed glass. Anger flared up, hot and sharp. How dare they? How could they? I replayed the words in my head over and over. "We just want this year to be special for Daniel." I wanted to scream. Wasn't my life special? Didn't I matter? How was it that no matter how much I achieved, I was always the problem? For the first time in years, I didn't just feel invisible. I felt disposable. I curled up on the couch, hugging a pillow to my chest like it could hold me together. Outside, the city buzzed with Christmas energy. Kids dragging sleds across slushy sidewalks, couples holding hands under store lights, delivery guys in Santa hats weaving through traffic. But inside my apartment, I felt utterly alone. The worst part? I still craved their approval. Even after everything, a part of me wanted to call back, to beg, to say, "Please let me come. Please don't leave me out." But I didn't. Pride and pain warred inside me, and pride won. Barely. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the street lamp bleeding through the blinds. My mind spun in circles. I thought about the years I'd tried to make them proud, the endless ways I'd tried to belong. And now even Christmas was gone. I felt like a child again, left behind, overlooked, watching the world go on without me. But there was something different this time, too. Beneath the grief, beneath the anger, there was a flicker of clarity. Maybe this was the push I needed. Maybe being uninvited was the final proof I could stop trying so hard to earn a seat at their table. Maybe it was time to build my own. At that moment, I didn't know where that thought would take me. All I knew was that Christmas was coming, and I would not be home. And for the first time, the word home didn't feel like a place. It felt like something I would have to create for myself. I packed my bags 2 days before Christmas. Not the bags I would have taken home to Queens, the ones with gifts tucked between sweaters and the bottle of wine I knew my dad liked. No. This year, my suitcase was filled with thick wool socks, thermal leggings, and a notebook I hadn't touched in months. Destination? Vermont. When I booked the cabin, it felt almost impulsive. A click on a website at midnight after staring at the blinking cursor of an unanswered text to my mom. But when the confirmation email landed in my inbox, it hit me I really wasn't going home. The drive up was quiet. Snow had started falling by the time I left Manhattan, soft flakes blurring the edges of the windshield. Christmas songs played faintly on the radio, but I kept turning the volume down. Every lyric felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Families gathered by the fire, laughter around the dinner table, not mine. By the time I reached the cabin, it was dusk. The sky was a bruised purple, and the only sound was the crunch of snow under my boots. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke from a fireplace that hadn't yet been lit. I dropped my bag by the door, and the silence hit me like a wave. Silence can be comforting, but this was different. This was heavy. I walked around the cabin, running my fingers along the rough wooden beams, pulling back the curtains to look out at the endless white. Mountains rose in the distance, dark and steady, as if mocking how small I felt. I set my phone on the table and turned it face down. A part of me hoped it would buzz, that maybe my parents would call and say they'd changed their minds, but I knew better. The first night was the hardest. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the snow pile up against the glass. My reflection stared back at me, tired and hollow-eyed. For years, I had dreamed of a Christmas where I wouldn't have to perform, where I wouldn't have to swallow my feelings at the dinner table while Daniel's latest drama consumed everyone's attention. And now, here it was. A Christmas without them. And it hurt more than I imagined. The loneliness wasn't loud, it was subtle. It was in the way the spoon clinked against the mug with no one to ask, "Want some too?" It was in the silence after I sneezed, no voice chiming in with, "Bless you." It was in the echo of the cabin when I whispered, "Merry Christmas," just to hear it said out loud. The next morning, I forced myself outside. The air was sharp, biting at my cheeks, filling my lungs with icy fire. I walked through the snow until my legs burned, until I couldn't feel my toes. The world was beautiful, so still it almost hurt. Trees bent under the weight of white, branches glistening like glass. My boots sank deep into the untouched powder, each step leaving proof I was there, even if no one else saw. Somewhere between the frozen silence of the woods and the steady crunch of my footsteps, I started talking to myself, out loud, telling stories, asking questions, almost pretending someone was walking beside me. "Why do you still want their approval?" I asked the trees. "Why does it matter so much what they think?" The forest didn't answer, but maybe it didn't have to. Back at the cabin, I lit the fireplace. The crackle of burning logs filled the room, finally breaking the silence.
I curled up with my notebook, staring at the blank page. For months, I'd been too busy, too consumed by work to write anything personal.
But now the words spilled out, not polished, not neat, just raw. I I wrote about being the forgotten daughter, about the Christmas ban, about the ache of wanting a family that couldn't love me the way I needed. And as the words filled the page, something shifted. The loneliness was still there, but it wasn't crushing anymore. It was honest. Christmas Day came and went quietly. I made pancakes for breakfast, even though no one else was there to share them. I sat by the fire, sipping hot chocolate spiked with whiskey, watching the flames dance. I FaceTimed a friend for a few minutes, but I didn't tell her the whole story. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I let her laughter fill the cabin for a little while, a borrowed joy to soften the edges. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet again, and for the first time, I realized maybe this was the point. Maybe this was what I needed. Not their noise, not their chaos, but space. Space to hear my own thoughts. Space to feel my own worth without their voices drowning it out. That night, as the fire burned low, I whispered something I hadn't said in years. I'm enough. The words felt strange on my tongue, almost fragile. But the longer I sat with them, the more solid they became. Enough, even without their approval. Enough, even without their table. Enough, even alone in a cabin in Vermont. It wasn't the Christmas I wanted. But maybe it was the Christmas I needed. The holidays ended the same way they always did. Too fast and leaving me with a strange aftertaste. Only this year, that aftertaste was sharper, bitter. No calls from home, no photos of family around the dinner table, just silence. By the time January rolled around, I buried myself back into work, the one place where things made sense. My office was still dressed in remnants of Christmas, stray tinsel along the window ledge, a wilting poinsettia someone had left near reception. I remember walking in one morning, coffee in hand, scrolling through emails, when my assistant dropped a stack of resumes on my desk. New applicants for the senior manager role, she said. I nodded, barely looking up, already running through the day's meetings in my head. I flipped through the pile mechanically at first. Education, experience, job history, scan, stack, move on. But then one name froze me. Daniel. My brother's name, printed in bold across the top of a resume. I blinked, convinced I was imagining it, but there it was. His full name, his Queen's address, his half-hearted work history laid out in black and white. For a moment, I just sat there, the office noise around me fading into a dull hum. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I reread the page again and again, like maybe the letters would rearrange themselves into someone else's story, but it was him, Daniel. The same Daniel who hadn't spoken to me all through Christmas. The same Daniel my parents defended every chance they got. The same Daniel they banned me from the holiday table for. And now he was applying for a job at my company. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. A rush of emotions hit me all at once. Confusion, disbelief, and a sting of betrayal I couldn't quite name. Did he even know this was my company? Or did he just blindly submit applications hoping someone would take him? I scanned the details. His resume was thin, almost laughably so. A handful of jobs, none lasting more than a year, no degree, skills listed that felt generic, like he'd copied them from a template. And yet, he was applying for a senior manager role. I almost laughed, except the lump in my throat was too heavy. The irony was brutal. All those years my parents praised him, held him up like the family's shining star, while I worked quietly in the background, building something real. And now here he was, unknowingly knocking on the door I had built with my own hands. I closed the file and set it aside, but it burned at the edge of my desk, taunting me. I tried to move on with the rest of the resumes, but every line blurred into meaninglessness. My mind kept circling back to his name. What would happen if he walked into this office and saw me sitting across the table? Would he be surprised? Embarrassed? Angry? I pictured his face, the cocky smirk he wore at family gatherings, the one that came with every careless comparison. Well, Daniel's got charm. He'll go far. My parents' voices echoed in my head. Did they even know he had applied? Did he? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the city lights flickering through my window, Daniel's resume still vivid in my mind. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was everything. Our history, our roles, our family's broken balance, compressed into a single application. The next morning, I picked it up again. I studied it carefully this time, not as a sister, but as a CEO. On merit alone, he didn't stand a chance. Objectively, he wasn't qualified. But this wasn't just any candidate. This was my brother, and that complicated everything. My assistant knocked gently on the door. "Any standouts so far?" she asked. I hesitated, my fingers still gripping Daniel's resume. "A few," I said, sliding it under the pile before she could see. As the days passed, I carried the weight of that discovery like a secret. In meetings, during calls, even over dinner with friends, it lingered at the back of my mind. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be him. It never was. It struck me how symbolic it all felt. After being shut out of Christmas, after being told not to show up because my presence might overshadow him, now he was walking straight into my world, asking for a place at my table. Not the dinner table, the boardroom table. And I would be the one to decide if he got a seat. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Power, after years of feeling powerless. Choice, after years of being denied one. When the interview list was finalized, his name was there, bold, unavoidable. I sat alone in my office that evening, staring at the schedule. My reflection in the darkened window looked back at me, stronger, sharper, but still carrying the ache of that little girl in Queens who never felt good enough. "Are you ready for this?" I whispered to myself. Because whether I was ready or not, it was coming. And for the first time, the story wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about facing the past head on. The day of the interview felt heavier than most. The air in the office had that nervous crackle it always does when something big is about to happen. I'd gone through a dozen interviews already that morning, smiling, shaking hands, asking questions that I could practically recite in my sleep. But my stomach twisted with every tick of the clock, because I knew his name was coming up next. Daniel. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to treat it like any other interview. But the truth? I'd barely slept the night before. I lay awake, imagining his reaction, hearing his voice in my head, mocking, surprised, maybe even angry. My brother had no idea I was the CEO, and in just a few minutes, he was going to walk into this room and find out. The boardroom was polished, minimalist, glass walls, sleek black chairs, a long oak table that reflected the winter light streaming through the windows. Usually, this space gave me confidence, made me feel in control. But right then, I felt exposed, like the walls were see-through, not just to the city, but to my thoughts. My assistant poked her head in. "Candidate number 14 is here," she said, her voice steady, oblivious to the earthquake shaking inside me. I straightened my blazer, nodded once. "Send him in." The door opened, and there he was. Daniel, my brother. For a split second, the years melted away. I saw him as the kid who used to flick cereal at me across the kitchen table, who was always forgiven for everything while I was scolded for nothing. Then the image shifted, and I saw him as he was now, older, slightly worn down, but still carrying that aura of casual entitlement. He walked in with that same half-smile he always wore when he thought the room already belonged to him. His eyes scanned the table, then froze on me. "Anna?" His voice cracked, not quite hiding the shock. I met his gaze, my expression neutral, professional. "Hello, Daniel. Please, have a seat." The silence that followed was thick, almost unbearable. I could hear the faint hum of the city outside, the ticking of the clock on the wall, even my own heartbeat. He lowered himself into the chair across from me, his posture stiff now, like the air had suddenly grown heavier. "You're the CEO?" he finally asked, the words slow, disbelieving. "Yes," I said simply. No apology, no explanation, just the truth. For the first time in my life, I watched Daniel struggle for words. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. The confidence he'd carried in here like armor was cracking right in front of me. I should have felt triumphant. I should have basked in that moment. The tables finally turned. But instead, what I felt was something far more complicated. A mixture of power, sorrow, and a lingering ache from years of being overlooked. "We'll proceed with the interview as scheduled," I said, my voice cool, businesslike. "Tell me about your experience in project management." He blinked as if trying to recalibrate. "Right, sure." He cleared his throat, launched into a halting explanation about his last job, about leading a team of 5, about handling client accounts. But as he spoke, I could see the cracks widening. His resume had already told me most of the story. Short stints, unfinished roles, excuses dressed up as experience. And yet, in this room, under my gaze, he seemed smaller, less certain. I listened, taking notes, nodding occasionally, but my mind was racing. I thought of every family dinner where my parents compared us, where they brushed aside my achievements and spotlighted his smallest victories. I thought of the Christmas I wasn't allowed to come home because my presence might overshadow him. And now, here we were, he sitting across from me, trying to prove himself, while I held the power he never imagined I'd have. The balance had shifted, completely. Halfway through his answer, he stopped and looked at me. Really looked at me. His voice faltered. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. I met his eyes, steady. "Because no one ever asked," I said. He sat back, stunned. The silence stretched again, heavy with unspoken history. I forced the conversation back on track, asking the next question. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" My tone was calm, detached, but inside I was shaking. He stumbled through an answer, something vague about leadership, growth, making an impact, but his usual confidence was gone. The room, once his stage, had turned into mine. By the end of the interview, I could see it on his face. The realization, the humiliation, maybe even a flicker of respect he didn't want to admit. He gathered his papers, stood slowly. "Thanks for your time," he muttered. I nodded once, professional. "We'll be in touch." He left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. I sat there alone, the silence pressing down on me. My hands trembled slightly, and I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That moment, watching my brother walk into my world and realize the truth, was one I'll never forget. It wasn't just a role reversal. It was a reckoning. For him. For me. For all the years we'd spent in a family where value was measured unfairly. And as I sat in that glass-walled boardroom, overlooking the city I'd built my life in, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing between us would ever be the same again. The next morning, Daniel came back for the follow-up. His resume hadn't changed overnight, but something in his attitude had. When he stepped into the boardroom this time, there was no shock left on his face, just a calculated calm. the kind you wear when you're holding a hidden card. He sat down, leaned back in the chair like he was trying to make himself comfortable, then gave me this smile. That same smile I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. The one that said, "Don't worry, I've got this covered. Someone will take care of me." "So," he started, clasping his hands on the table, "I know yesterday might have been unexpected." Unexpected. That word hung in the air like a bad aftertaste. "But come on, Anna. We're family. Don't you think that counts for something here?" His tone was light, almost playful, but underneath it was that same entitlement that had followed him all his life. I kept my voice steady. "Daniel, in this company, what counts is skill, experience, and fit for the role. That's it." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "But you know me. You know I can learn. And honestly, wouldn't it look bad turning away your own brother? People might think you don't even take care of your family." That hit like a sharp stone. I felt the old guilt stirring, the same guilt my parents had always used, reminding me of my duty, my responsibility, my place. For a second, I almost heard my father's voice layered over Daniel's. "Family comes first, Anna. Always." But I forced myself to breathe, to sit straighter, to hold my ground. "This isn't about family image," I said slowly, each word deliberate. "It's about whether you're the right person for the job." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Right person for the job? Anna, I've seen the kind of people who work here. Half of them don't even have the background I do, and look, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't even be sitting here. You wouldn't have pushed so hard if you didn't have me to compete with all those years. I made you." That stung more than I wanted to admit. For a moment, I felt the old burn in my chest, the need to prove him wrong, to prove to all of them that I was enough. But this wasn't my childhood kitchen table. This was my boardroom. "No, Daniel," I said firmly, my voice sharper now. "You didn't make me. I made me. Every late night, every failed pitch, every time someone told me no and I kept going anyway. That was me, and that's why I'm here." His jaw tightened. "So what? You're just going to shut the door on me? After everything?" I swallowed, my throat tight, but I didn't look away. "I'm not shutting the door. I'm giving you the same chance I'd give anyone else. If your experience and your skills match what we need, you'll move forward. If not, you won't. It's not about last names. Not anymore." The silence after that was heavy, but different from the day before. Yesterday's silence was shock. Today's was anger. He slumped back in his chair, his voice lower now. "You've changed, Anna." I nodded. Yes, I had to. For a second, I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Hurt, maybe even recognition. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same defensive mask he always wore. The rest of the interview was short, perfunctory. He answered questions, I wrote notes, but the truth was already clear to both of us. He wasn't right for the role, and no amount of family ties could change that. When he left the room, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. Exhaustion from holding that line, from refusing to cave to the familiar pull of guilt and expectation. Relief because for once I hadn't betrayed myself to make someone else comfortable. It wasn't easy, it wasn't clean, but it was necessary. Family might shape us, family might test us, but in that boardroom, family didn't define us. Credentials did. Effort did. And Daniel, for the first time in his life, was faced with the truth that our last name wasn't enough to carry him through. And me? I finally realized that being CEO wasn't just about building a company. It was about unlearning the roles my family had written for me and writing my own rules instead. When Daniel walked out of that boardroom, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would quiet down. I told myself he'd lick his wounds, move on, maybe even take the rejection as motivation to grow. But I should have known better. Daniel never carried his disappointments alone. He always brought them home, handed them off like gifts no one wanted. 2 days later, my phone lit up with his name. I hesitated before answering. My chest tightened the way it always did before a storm. "Anna," he said, his voice clipped. I told Mom and Dad. My heart sank. Told them what? That you embarrassed me. That you made me look like a fool in front of your whole company. That you didn't even give me a real chance because you're too busy playing CEO. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear my parents' voices rising behind him, like ghosts crowding the call. Sure enough, an hour later, my mother's number appeared. I answered, and the moment I did, it was like being dragged back into childhood. "Anna, how could you treat your brother this way?" Her tone was sharp, frantic, layered with disappointment. "He came to you for help, and you slammed the door in his face? What kind of sister does that?" "I didn't slam the door," I said quietly. "I treated him like any other candidate. That's what being fair means." "Fair?" she snapped. "Family isn't about fair. Family is about loyalty, about helping each other. You have more than enough, Anna. Couldn't you have given him a chance?" Her words cut deeper than I wanted them to. I stood in my kitchen, hand gripping the counter, the smell of coffee still hanging in the air from the morning. The warmth of the mug I'd set down moments earlier had already cooled. Then my father's voice boomed through the speaker. "Your brother came to you for support and you humiliated him. After all we did for you, this is how you repay us?" I almost laughed at the irony. After all we did for you. What exactly had they done for me? Years of reminding me I was second best? Years of pushing me aside so Daniel could shine? "Dad," I said, forcing my tone to stay even. This wasn't personal. It was professional. He didn't have the qualifications. "Qualifications?" His voice rose, almost a growl. "He's your brother. That should have been enough." The words echoed in my chest. That was the whole problem. That had always been the problem. For them, Daniel's name was enough. His charm was enough. His potential was enough. For me, nothing was ever enough. And now, because I didn't bend the rules, because I dared to treat Daniel like an adult in the real world, I was the villain again. The calls didn't stop there. My phone buzzed with messages, paragraphs of blame, lines dripping with guilt. "You've forgotten where you came from. You think you're better than us. What's money worth if you can't even help your own blood?" At one point, my mother's voice cracked over voicemail. "Anna, we're your family. We raised you. If you won't help Daniel, at least help us. You know things aren't easy. Can't you spare something?" That last part twisted the knife deeper. It was never just about Daniel. It was about them, too. The money. The success they'd ignored until it was convenient. I sat on my couch that night. The apartment quiet except for the hum of the heater. I stared at the blinking light on my phone, new voicemail, new texts, new demands. The walls around me felt tighter with every breath. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. But instead I just sat there, feeling the pressure build like a weight on my chest. And in that suffocating silence, one thought kept circling my mind. No matter what I achieved, no matter how far I came, to them I would always be the one who owed loyalty, owed money, owed Daniel a pedestal to stand on. The boardroom was one battle, but this was the war waiting at home. And for the first time, I realized I couldn't win it by playing their game anymore. I remember sitting in my apartment one evening, the city lights blinking outside my window like restless stars. My phone sat on the table, buzzing again with another call from my mother. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My chest already felt heavy, weighed down by weeks of guilt-tripping and demands. They wanted money, They wanted favors. They wanted me to erase Daniel's failure and rewrite it with my resources. And I realized, in that moment of silence, that I had to choose. Either keep bending until I broke, or finally draw the line. When I called them back the next day, my hands trembled. But not with fear, with resolve. Mom picked up almost immediately.
Anna, thank God. We've been waiting. We need to talk about Daniel. He's devastated. You have to make this right.
Her voice cracked, a mixture of desperation and pressure. The same tone she'd used my whole life to make me feel responsible for problems that were never mine. Mom, I said slowly, carefully, I can't give Daniel a job, and I can't give you money. We said, silence. Then a sharp inhale like I'd slapped her. Can't or won't? Won't, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Because every time I give in, I lose myself. And I've worked too hard, fought too long to keep losing myself for you. There was a pause. I could almost picture her hand pressed against her chest, eyes wide with disbelief. Then Dad's voice thundered in from the background. Ungrateful, that's what you are. After everything we did, you turn your back on your own blood? My throat tightened, but I pushed forward. No, I'm not turning my back. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. I love you, but I won't keep pouring myself out just so Daniel can avoid facing reality. Mom's voice grew sharp. So what are you saying, Anna? That you'd rather let your family fall apart than help? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. I'm saying if this family really wants to heal, we need something different. We need therapy, together. Otherwise, we'll just keep bleeding each other dry. The line went dead quiet. I could hear my father muttering in the background, his disbelief thick as smoke. Then Mom scoffed. Therapy? That's your solution? You think some stranger can tell us how to be a family? Yes, I said, because whatever we've been doing isn't working. It hasn't worked for years. And I can't keep living in that broken cycle. My heart pounded in my ears, but for the first time I didn't feel small. I felt grounded, clear. Their voices rose again, overlapping, accusations, defenses, insults. But I didn't let them pierce me the way they used to. Instead, I repeated my boundary like a mantra. I won't give money. I won't give a job. If you want a relationship with me, we go to therapy. That's the only way. Finally, my mother sighed, long and shaky, like she'd run out of breath. You've changed, Anna. I swallowed hard. No, I finally found myself, and I'm not going back. When I hung up, the silence in my apartment was deafening, but not empty. It was full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. Drawing that line didn't fix everything, not yet. But it was the first brick in a new wall, one built not to shut them out, but to protect me. And maybe, just maybe, to give us a chance at rebuilding from something healthier. Walking into that therapist's office for the first time felt unreal. The walls were painted in muted tones, a soft beige with framed prints of mountains and calm seas. A small diffuser hummed in the corner, releasing lavender into the air. It was nothing like the chaos that usually hung over our family gatherings. For once, the space felt safe, neutral. I sat on the far end of the couch, legs crossed tightly, my hands clenched around a mug of herbal tea the therapist had offered. Across from me, Daniel slouched in the chair, arms folded, his jaw set like stone. My parents sat side by side on another couch, my mother fidgeting with her purse strap, my father glaring at the floor as if daring it to challenge him. The therapist smiled gently. Thank you all for being here. This isn't easy, I know, but the fact that you showed up, it's a step forward. Nobody spoke. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Finally, the therapist looked at me. Anna, since you initiated this, would you like to start? I took a shaky breath, my heart hammered in my chest. I suggested this because I can't keep going the way we have. I feel like I've been carrying this invisible weight my whole life, always working harder, always trying to be seen, but somehow never enough. And lately, it's been breaking me. My mom's eyes welled with tears. We never meant to make you feel that way. Yes, you did. I cut in, sharper than I intended. My throat burned, but the words wouldn't stop. Every time you looked past me to praise Daniel, every time you told me to be happy for him, even when I was the one sacrificing, you might not have said it out loud, but you showed me over and over. His comfort mattered more than my existence. The room went silent again. My father shifted, his voice low and defensive. We only wanted what was best for the family. Daniel needed support. You were stronger. You didn't need us. I let out a bitter laugh. That's the point. I did need you. But because I seemed strong, you decided I didn't deserve care. Do you know what that does to a child? To feel invisible in her own home? For a moment, nobody moved. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel spoke. His voice was rough, almost reluctant. You think I didn't feel it too? I blinked at him. What? He looked at me, his arms dropping from his chest. His eyes were tired, ringed with shadows. Do you think it was easy being the golden boy? Do you know how much pressure it was? Every mistake I made, they covered. Every failure they excused. And instead of helping me grow, it made me weak. I don't know who I am without their praise. I don't even know if I'm good at anything. The room froze. My mother gasped softly. My father's eyes flickered, unsure. Daniel swallowed hard. When I walked into your company and saw you sitting there, Anna, it destroyed me. Because I realized, for the first time, that I've been living a lie. You built something real. You fought for it. And me? I've been coasting. And now I don't even know how to start. His words hit me like a punch. For so long, I'd painted him as the enemy, the favored child who had everything handed to him. But here he was, admitting the truth, that he too was crushed by the pedestal our parents had placed him on. The therapist leaned in. What I'm hearing is both of you were hurt by the same pattern, just in different ways. Anna was unseen, Daniel was overprotected. Both roles can be damaging. Tears stung my eyes. For the first time, I didn't just see my brother as the golden boy. I saw a man who'd been trapped in a role he never asked for. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. We thought we were helping. We didn't realize. She glanced at my father, but he stayed silent, his jaw tight. We wanted to protect you both. But maybe we failed. Head. Something shifted in the room. Not a resolution, not yet, but the first crack in the wall we'd built around ourselves. I leaned forward, my voice softer now. I don't want to hate you. I don't want to cut ties. But I can't keep living in denial. If this family has a chance, it's only if we all face the truth. No more pretending, no more sweeping pain under the rug. Daniel's eyes met mine. For once there was no rivalry, no resentment, just exhaustion, and maybe a flicker of understanding. I don't want to be the golden boy anymore, he admitted quietly. I just want to be me. That simple sentence cracked something inside me. For years, I thought he thrived on the favoritism. Now I realized it had chained him just as much as it had silenced me. The therapist nodded. That's a start. Healing doesn't happen in one session, but this honesty is the first step. I left that day drained, but strangely lighter. The road ahead would be long. There would be more shouting, more tears, maybe even more slammed doors. But for the first time in years, I felt a sliver of hope. Because we had finally spoken truths that had been buried for decades. And in that raw honesty, painful as it was, there was the possibility of something I hadn't dared believe in. A family that could heal. Snow was falling over New York, soft flakes swirling around the yellow glow of street lamps. The city was alive with Christmas energy, shoppers carrying bags, kids dragging parents toward toy store windows, the faint sound of carolers echoing from a street corner. I stood at the window of my apartment looking out over it all, and I realized this Christmas was going to be nothing like the ones before. For the first time, I wasn't dreading the holiday. I wasn't bracing myself for judgment, for the heavy silence of being excluded. This year was different. Because this time, my family was coming to me. I'll admit, I was nervous. Old wounds don't disappear overnight. Therapy sessions had opened doors we'd spent decades bolting shut, but healing is messy. It's uneven. Some weeks felt like progress, others like stepping back into old patterns. But here's the thing. We kept showing up. We kept talking. And that was more than we'd ever done before. When my mom called in early December and said, "Anna, we'd like to come to New York for Christmas, if you'll have us," my throat tightened. A year ago, they had told me not to come home. A year ago, I'd cried alone in Vermont, wondering if I even had a family anymore. And now, they wanted to come to me. Christmas morning arrived with the smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven. I'd woken up before sunrise, too restless to sleep, and filled my kitchen with the warmth of butter and sugar, something I'd never done before. My place wasn't decorated like the homes you see in movies, just a small tree in the corner, lights strung up along the windows, stockings hung unevenly on the wall, but it felt cozy. It felt mine. When the buzzer rang, I nearly dropped the pan. My heart pounded as I opened the door. There they were. My mom holding a dish covered in foil, my dad carrying a duffel bag, and Daniel with his hands shoved in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold. For a second, we all just stood there. No words, just the weight of last Christmas hanging heavy between us. Then my mom whispered, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," and stepped forward to hug me. I let her, slowly, awkwardly at first, but then I held on. Inside, the air was filled with the mix of cinnamon and city chill, and for the first time in years, we all sat down at the same table. It wasn't perfect. My dad still spoke in short sentences, stiff and guarded. My mom fussed over the food too much. Daniel kept glancing around, as if unsure where to fit in. But there was no shouting, no accusations, just quiet effort. At one point, Daniel broke the silence. He set his fork down and said, "I know I've been handed things I didn't earn, and I know I took advantage of that. But this year, I've been trying to work, really work for the first time in my life. And it's harder than I thought. I respect what you built, Anna, more than I ever said out loud." His words caught me off guard. I searched his face, waiting for the smirk, the defensive edge he usually carried. But it wasn't there. He looked tired, honest. And in that moment, I believed him. My father cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "We made mistakes. Too many. Maybe we can't undo them, but we're trying." The words weren't polished. They weren't the kind of dramatic apology you see in movies, but they were real. And maybe that mattered more. I felt something loosen inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a softening. A recognition that maybe, for the first time, they were seeing me not as the strong one or the other child, but as a person, their daughter. We spent the afternoon playing board games, something we hadn't done since I was little. Daniel cheated, of course, and my dad pretended not to notice. My mom laughed so hard she cried when I won, And for a few precious hours, it felt like we weren't carrying decades of baggage. We were just a family. Messy, imperfect, but trying. That evening, we bundled up and walked down Fifth Avenue, where the department store windows glowed with elaborate Christmas displays. My mom stopped every few steps to point something out. Daniel teased her gently. My dad took photos on his phone, his face softening in ways I hadn't seen before. As we stood in front of the Rockefeller Center tree, its lights blazing against the night sky, I realized something important. Healing doesn't erase the past. It doesn't mean forgetting the hurt, but it means choosing to move forward anyway. Choosing to create new memories, even if the old ones still ache. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could. That Christmas didn't fix everything, but it gave me hope. And hope, I learned, can be enough to start over. When I look back at everything, the phone call that shattered me, the empty cabin in Vermont, the boardroom standoff, the therapy sessions, and that new kind of Christmas in New York, I realized something I wish I'd known a long time ago. Family isn't always defined by blood. For so many years, I bent myself trying to earn my parents' approval, trying to squeeze into a mold that never fit me. I studied harder, worked longer, achieved more. And yet, nothing ever shifted. Daniel was the golden child, and I was the shadow. It took decades and, honestly, a lot of pain for me to see that my worth never lived in their recognition. It lives in me. And it also lives in the people I choose to surround myself with. Because the truth is, when my parents turned me away that Christmas, I wasn't completely alone. Friends checked in on me. My team at work, the very people I'd poured into, were the ones who reminded me of my strength. The neighbor who knocked on my door with cookies. The colleague who sent me a text that simply said, "You deserve better." They weren't bound to me by DNA, but they showed up when it mattered. That's family too. We're taught to believe that family is unconditional love, that it's automatic. But some of us grow up learning that love can come with strings, with comparisons, with conditions. And here's what I've learned. You have the power to rewrite that narrative. You have the power to decide who gets to sit at your table, whose voice gets to matter in your story. Now, don't get me wrong. Rebuilding bridges with my parents has been part of my healing. I'm grateful for the progress we've made. But I no longer chase their approval like oxygen. If it comes, fine. If it doesn't, I still breathe. The family we choose, the friends who celebrate us, the mentors who guide us, the partners who stand steady, the communities we build, that's the soil where real love grows. And when I think about what kind of legacy I want to live, it's not about proving myself to people who couldn't see me. It's about choosing love, peace, and belonging where they truly exist. So if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, I want you to hear me. You are not broken. You don't have to keep shrinking just to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. Your light doesn't need their permission to shine. Sometimes the bravest, most empowering thing we can do is stop knocking on closed doors and start building our own homes with people who don't just tolerate us, but truly love us for who we are. That's the family we choose. And that's where we finally belong.